Great. All right. Well, welcome. As Faith said, I'm Geordie Elkins. I'm the executive director of Hyde Foundation in Reading, and I do want to talk about genetic diversity, but also just about the importance of native plants and the role that they play in our landscape. I thought I'd give just a little bit of background on me and Heisted if you're not familiar with us. I suspect you're probably not. People always say, "Oh, you're sort of like this under the radar organization." So I'll just give you a little bit of who we are. But Heisted was formed in the 80s. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. 1982 by Jim and Elizabeth Dudley set aside land for an arboretum with the intent of studying and learning about the wooded landscape and habitats. And they also wanted it to be a place for people to visit and experience the beauty of nature and just, enjoy like a quiet, peaceful atmosphere. And it really is that today. We have programs in education and research. We model ecologically sensitive land stewardship. And increasingly, we're turning our efforts to woodland conservation and land conservation, regional conservation. It's really sort of evolved in those years. Today, Heisted has about 190 acres of property in Reading. It's a really unique piece of land. We're located up here in the northern part of Reading, sort of due north of Westport. And the landscape itself, if you look at this map, it's two things. One is the map on top, but then there's a cross section of it on the bottom. And really what this shows is a property that we have has all of these unique, diverse features in it and different habitats. And so it means you can walk 190 acres, or not even all of that, and experience just a lot of diversity and different types of landscape. And it's really sort of the story of two hills that are opposing one another. If you look at the lower part of the slide, that's a cross section of the landscape. So there are these two hills and this pond in the center, but they're completely different, and they just allow us to see what grows in this region and to really teach people about the plant communities and the wildlife that are there. And so if I sort of go, right to left, across this map, um, we would start first with this grassland meadow, and you can't really see it, but the red circle, there's a bobolink there, which is an increasingly rare grassland bird that migrates from Argentina, nests here in these fields and other large grasslands in the Northeast, and migrates back each year. If you go down the slope from that, you get into a mesic forest, which is a forest of maple trees and tulip trees that like rich, moist soils, high fertility. It's really dense and lush. It's got a lot of invaded plants in it because they also like those good growing conditions. Going across the property, then you end up at the pond. We've got this wetland habitat and all the plants that are sort of typical of that. Next to that, there's a woodland swamp and this boardwalk that allows you to go in the center of this thing and see things that you could normally never get in here. It's almost impenetrable without the boardwalk. The muck and the mire, unless it's frozen, you can't get in here. But when you visit, this allows you access to see things that you otherwise wouldn't really be able to see that easily. And then we have this pollinator meadow just up from the swamp that's different from the grassland meadow. It's smaller, but it's also got a lot more flowering plants and fewer grasses. So they're more pollinators and butterflies and not that inhabit this area. And then going uphill, up second hill, it's a very different forest. On the other side, we had the mesic forest. On this hill, it's a dry, rocky hill. And so it's got thin soils and low fertility, low moisture. And so it's oak trees. It's not nearly as lush. You can see how open the understory is and how rocky it is. There's lots of laurel that grows there. And then we also have a collection of mountain laurel cultivars planted at Highstead. We started as a native plant arboretum. And if you know us from way back, you may call us Highstead Arboretum. Some people refer to us as that. But when we expanded our mission beyond native plants and got into ecology and land conservation, we dropped the Arboretum from our name and we go by Highstead now. But it's really a special piece of land, very diverse, and there's a lot to experience. And so I invite you to come visit sometime. We're open weekdays, 8:30 to 4, and when on the weekends when we have events. And so you can sign up for our mailing list and get that. But we are open to the public. We just ask that you call ahead. We're not a huge facility. We don't have room for, tons of people. So we're not really, driving a lot of visitation, but we are open and you're welcome to come and call ahead and schedule a visit. Besides the property that we have, we've got a number of program areas that we work in, and one of our most important is regional conservation. We work with land trusts around New England to form regional conservation partnerships, and we support the work that they do. The other area that we work in is ecology. We do studying of the landscape, the property that we've got on site, and also regionally and throughout all New England. We've got ecologists who studies deer and moose, old growth forests and wildlands, and then we study our own property. We did a research, a survey of moths last year, and Lucas Karras, who's been working with us, he's a 16 or 17-year-old moth phenom, that found 104 species of moths at Highstead, and there are only 175 in the state of Connecticut, which I just find that mind-blowing, and it just goes to speak of the diversity of our property and what's on it and how special it is. And then another area that we've got, we do land stewardship, and this is one corner of our pond, and you can see here that it's got Phragmites that's invaded it. And so we did a study looking at mechanical and chemical treatment options, and then we wrote up a paper, and that's what we do. We'll study different land stewardship techniques and then share our findings that other people can benefit from what we've learned. And then another project that we're really involved with is the Ecotype project. And I know there have been other presentations on that, so I won't go too deeply into that. But if you're not familiar with it, the Ecotype project is a program that's aimed at getting locally collected and sourced seed into the marketplace for both gardeners and landscape restoration. If you don't know what an ecotype is, it's a genetically distinct population of plants or animals. It grows in one particular spot. And so it's defined by ecoregions. And so this map may look familiar to you. If you're a gardener, it resembles the USDA hardiness zone map. And it shows, that map shows what grows where based on temperatures. But ecoregions are defined using a lot more factors. And so they're really based on geology, landform, soils, climate, and hydrology. And it really, each of the colors here sort of shows an area that has very similar physical growing features. And so you can see things here that you might recognize. If you go look up and down the East Coast, that yellow band is the Appalachian Mountains. And even though it stretches from Alabama all the way up into New Jersey and New York, it's a similar growing climate because of the altitude of the mountains there. And so it's more than just temperature that's affecting it. If you look out west, you can see the Great Basin and the Great Plains, and these are all, areas with similar growing conditions where the same colonies of plants, species grow there. And just zooming in the Northeast, we're in the Northeast coastal zone, ecoregion 59. And so you can see that the habitat where we live is sort of similar across most of Connecticut and parts of Massachusetts and up into the Hudson Valley. But, to sort of talk about the importance of ecotypes and really kind of show like what the whole concept is about, I'm going to use New England aster, which is, a great plant, one that blooms in September and sometimes into October. It's a great pollinator plant late in the season when a lot of things aren't blooming. It's spectacular, the nice charismatic purple flowers and sometimes pink flowers. It's one of my favorite plants. And then this is a map of where New England aster grows in the US. The purple is where it grows. It's its natural range. Each one of those purple areas is a county. And so you can see it grows in all 48 lower United States. But if you look in the upper right where Connecticut and New England is, that yellow area is ecoregion 59. And if you think about, New England aster that's growing in Connecticut, and then think of one that's growing, is adapted to grow in Florida or California or the Pacific Northwest, you can imagine that you would end up getting local populations that are suited to the climate that they're growing in. So something that grows in Florida is not going to be well suited to Connecticut because it never gets cold in Florida. The first winter that we have, it has the potential of really, possibly killing it, or it just won't be as hardy and as robust. It may bloom at a different time of year, so it doesn't align with the pollinators that may need it at a certain season. And so the idea of ecotypes is collecting seed from the local area, increasing it, making it available, and then putting it back into the same region. So it's well adapted. And if you think about, if you sort of compare it to beers, and you think about like Anheuser, InBev, and Molson Coors, like those two are like the major beer distributors in the US. And, the two of those alone cover like 2/3 of the beer market. But you've got 1,900 microbreweries across the United States. And if each of those microbreweries sort of has like their distinct, their kind of, regionally unique craft beer. And ecotypes are really sort of the craft beer of plants. It's kind of a good way to think about it, a good comparison. But the nursery industry in our country strives for uniformity. It's highly centralized. It's sort of like the InBev and the Molson Coors. Everything's the same across the country. There are a few centers where all the plants are grown. Most of the plants are clones, so they're all identical to each other. There's no genetic diversity in them. In most of the nursery industry, they don't want genetic diversity because they want people to be able to buy three trees and they want them all to match and look exactly the same. And if you're only looking at aesthetics, that might be important. But if you're taking into consideration other roles that those trees play in the landscape, that those plants play, being genetically identical isn't necessarily a good thing and can even be a bad thing. So when we talk about collecting seeds for the Ecotype project, we have collectors that go into the wild and they sample seed and they try to get as much of the population captured as they possibly can. This is my coworker, Jesse. He could harvest all the seed in a 5-foot area around him and have enough to put a whole field of this little blue stem grass into seed production. But that's not the goal. The goal is to really capture the fullness of the genetic diversity. So when he samples a population for an ecotype, he'll go to the wet areas and the dry areas, to the shady areas and the sunny places. We might come a couple times during the growing season or during the fruiting season, so that we capture seeds that are released early and those that are released late from early and late blooming flowers, and really trying to maximize the genetic diversity. And that's what you're striving for when you're trying to get an ecotype plant. Yeah, just this is kind of what the collecting is like. It's very careful and really trying to just get as much diversity as possible. And our native flora, it's got some rock stars. These are a couple of my favorite plants that grow at Highstead. Purple milkweed is a plant of special concern. Marsh marigold's one of the earliest blooming plants. It comes up, when there still aren't even leaves on the trees. It's growing in the swamp. And then the broadleaved mountain mint is just a pollinator powerhouse and just so important for beneficial insects. And these are some of the kind of charismatic, plants that everyone wants to grow, and they're excellent. And I'm just sort of a fan of these ambassadors of native plants. But there's a lot more to native plants than just the showy, the flowers that everyone likes for the landscape. So I'm going to share a story that's about something that's not so visually charismatic, but it's a story that's really intricate and there's a lot happening. And it really sort of helps us see how much is going on around us, sort of right under our noses that we're not even aware of. But we pass by it all the time and it's just kind of largely unnoticed, but it's nature just, doing what nature does in the background. And so I'm going to talk about a goldenrod gall, which is, sort of like this obscure insect damage that happens to a plant. And a lot of people would see this and they would be absolutely horrified. You may not be familiar with it in this context, but when you do see it frequently, this is how you see it. You see it in the winter because these galls are unnoticed. But once the foliage drops off, you'll see a meadow and you'll see these bulbous galls at the top of former goldenrod stems. And what the gall is, it's this abnormal growth of plant tissue that's on the stem of the plant. And it's generally caused by an insect that's either chewing or laying an egg on the stem of the plant. And it's parasitic in nature. It's not helping the plant. And in this case, these galls reduce the number of seeds. And so it's really, detracting from the plant's ability to reproduce and survive. But I think one point to make is that there's more to this story than just an insect damaging a plant. Like people might see this and they would say, oh, this is bad. The plant's being harmed. But it's really just the beginning of sort of an interesting story of the natural world that is all around us. And I never cease to be amazed at just how intricate and complex and all the interactions of nature are. And I like this drawing that was done because it starts to capture some of the complexity of everything that's happening around that gall. One of the first books I remember being forced to read in high school was Barry Commoner's book, and in it he talks about the four laws of ecology. And to this day, I remember them clear as day. I don't remember much else from that ecology class, but I do remember his four laws. And the first one is everything is connected to everything else. And that is really true in sort of this story of the lowly goldenrod gall fly. And that's kind of what this story is about. So this is the adult goldenrod gall fly. I'll just call it a fly for short, make it easy to speak. But it is what grows out of this gall. It usually emerges in May, and it's alive for 2 weeks. It spends 50 weeks of the year inside that gall. But once they emerge and they mate, the females go in search of suitable goldenrod plants to lay their eggs on. But they won't lay their eggs on just any old goldenrod. The preference is Solidago altissima. Sometimes they'll lay eggs in Solidago gigantea, or occasionally in Solidago canadensis. But they really want to be laying their eggs in Solidago altissima. This fly has sensory receptors in its feet, and then also where it lays its eggs. It's able, if you see it, it looks almost like a stinger on the back of the fly. And it's sort of piercing into the leaf, and that's where it deposits the egg. Well, it can actually sense with that sort of stinger appendage where it can almost taste and smell the plant. So it can tell if it's using the right species of goldenrod or not. That appendage called an ovipositor, it's almost like a superpower. I can think of botanists, if they could like touch a plant and just know what species it is, they would, that would be like a superpower that they would love to have. But this sort of tiny little fly has that ability, that ovipositor. It can sense the chemical signal of that species of goldenrod, which is pretty mind-blowing. They've actually done experiments where they've, taken the leaves of Solidago altissima, which the fly wants, and they've wrapped them around other species of goldenrod and tried to trick the fly. And what happens is it will like sort of probe around, and it'll either figure out that it's the wrong species and it'll go someplace else, or it'll land on that species because it's been tricked to go there. It'll lay its egg in the wrong species, and frequently the egg will die because for whatever reason, if it's not in the right species of goldenrod, it doesn't allow the larvae to thrive. So after so they've tricked this thing, and they've figured out that it can sort of identify the right plant that it wants to be laying its eggs on. So, it's kind of amazing that in one sense, there's a very strict and very tight relationship between the fly and the species of goldenrod it wants to lay its egg on. But that said, there's still a degree of adaptability, because they've also noted that in the southern part of the range, this fly will only lay its egg on the altissima. But then they've noticed further north in the range, that it's actually starting to lay its egg on Solidago gigantea. So there's like this division that's happening, the separation where the plants in the southern part are being true to their history, but the other ones are starting to sort of morph and change and adapt. And it's really, sort of this amazing ability of nature to really be, adaptable and changeable. As much as it's, sort of in many ways specialized and unique, at the same time, it can also be adaptable, which is pretty amazing. So it's actually possible that we could be watching a new species emerge. This could be splitting into two species. We don't know that, but it seems it could be that way. So anyway, once the egg is laid on the stem, what happens is it hatches within a week, and then the young larva like burrows into the stem, and once it's there, that damage triggers the goldenrod to produce this gall, and that excess tissue is the food that larva needs to feed on, and so it'll eat that spongy, nutritious tissue in the center of the gall, and the plant will actually produce more, and in response, it sort of is feeding it. But what's interesting is that not all individual plants produce a lot of galls. These plants are perennial, which means they come back each year from the same plant. And the researchers have gone back to the same plants year after year. And what they've realized is that some of these plants don't produce any galls at all. Others produce a few galls, and others will produce tons of galls. And so what that's showing is that in this population, gold genes that dictates how many galls the plant will produce. And you say, all right, well, that's great. Why is that important? But what's interesting about it is that the fly, if there are other, I guess what I want to say is there are other actors in the story, and they're not necessarily in the in the sketch, the drawing that's out there. But what they've done is they've seen that there's another wasp that will parasitize the fly. So this wasp will come and it will try to lay its egg in the fly larva, parasitize it, and sort of kill it and take it over. So what the goldenrod has done is that it figured out, or well, it didn't figure out, it doesn't have a brain, but in any case, it has changed in ways that it will change the thickness and the size of the gall. If the gall is thin, that wasp can kill the fly larva that's in there. If it's really thick, the wasp isn't able to penetrate it and lay its egg in there and parasitize the fly larva. So that's another feature that's changed. So there are two things that are sort of changing in tandem with each other. One is the number of galls. One is the size and the thickness of the galls. And if you think about it, you've got this pressure from this parasitic wasp that's trying to kill the fly larva in there. And in some cases, it's killing it. And in some cases, it's not. That's putting, selective genetic pressure on, what survives and what doesn't survive. And all of these things are sort of happening in tandem at the same time. The other character that's kind of in this story that I want to point out is the bird. And this is sort of what makes a lot of it come together, is the goldenrod gall fly it wants to make a gall that is thick enough to be protected from the wasp, but if it's too thick and if there are too many galls, it attracts birds. Like if birds see a lot of big galls, these chickadees and other downy woodpeckers will come, and they have big beaks. They can just get right through any gall and just eat, what's ever in there, and they'll attack anything. So really, for the goldenrod fly to survive, it needs to be able to have a gall that's not too thin so that the wasp can parasitize it, not too thick and not too many galls so that the birds are attracted to it. It's got to be like just right. It's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, not too hot, not too cold, just right. And so, there's all this tension and this back and forth between all of these different elements that are happening in here. The different predators and the prey, all these things are sort of creating, this push and pull, this tug of war. And what is underlying all of this is the assumption of genetic plasticity. This idea that an organism's genetics that its genetic makeup can adapt and change in response to environmental conditions. Organisms can only adapt and change in an environment if they've got a broad pool of genes that allow them to do that. And, in a sense, it's like having more colors in your coloring box, in your crayons. When I grew up, I remember, going to school. I think I was in kindergarten and I had 8 crayons in my crayon thing. And then this other guy showed up and he had like the 64 pack. And I remember being, wow, I want the 64 crayons. And genes, if you've got more crayons, you've got more colors, you can be more creative. There's more you can do. And genes are kind of like that. The more diversity that exists, the more ability there is for organisms to adapt and change and to be stable and really have the resilience that's needed, and all of it is just this web, that all of these interactions interplaying with each other where everything's connected to everything else. A change in one element affects others, and it's always sort of this push and pull, this tug of war. And if you tug on any thread in that web, it shakes the rest of the web. It's all connected. And that makes it, in a lot of ways, it makes it resilient and strong. And so, part of the reason I say that is because, our climate's changing. We all know that. I'm not giving you any new news. But this particular chart is something I did just sort of out of curiosity a few years ago. And it's the average minimum and maximum temperature in January and February. So I've got, on the left is the historical average. I've got 2003 or 2023, 2024. I haven't done 2025 yet because we've got another couple of days for the month to end and for me to crunch the data. Fortunately, I'm expecting this year will be much closer to the historic. But what you see here is this kind of increasing in temperature, this change in our climate. And if you look at a global mapping of increased temperature, you see that in the Northeast, we're experiencing some of the greatest changes in climate. It's really pretty intense here relative to other places. So, part of nature is fragile and at risk, but the good news is it's also very resilient and it has the ability to adapt. And I think a lot of times we kind of think like, oh, what do I do? There's, I can't fight climate change. It's too big. There's, what can I do about it? But I think there's something that we can all do, and that's plant something. And that might seem like a really simple answer, but it's something that if you have a yard, you can do it. You know, plants are one of our best defenses that we've got against climate change. They absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. They cool the air. They provide food and shelter. We're increasingly losing our natural plant communities to development and natural resource extraction. And these are big things that we can't solve or fix, but we can all plant something. And planting something is just absolutely crucial in trying to, resolve some of the climate change issues that we're going to be facing. Um, uh, Sorry, this is actually a little out of order, but I'll roll with it. Um, so sometimes when I talk to groups of people, and I talk about the importance of ecotypes, I talk about the importance of native plants. People sometimes they get worried that they're going to make a mistake, that they're not going to do it right. And it almost leads to paralysis, that, they won't be able to find the ecotype plant or the right native plant, or they'll put it in the wrong place. And what I want to encourage you is to, don't be that person. And what I love about this continuum here is that it does a great job of showing the options. The best thing to do is to plant an ecotype. If you can do that, that's great. It's got genetic diversity. It'll help expand the natural plant communities that are already existing in this area. It will give more genetic diversity. It will give resilience to our environment in the face of the changes that are going on. But if you can't do that, it's a great choice just to plant a native plant. If you can't do that, plant a nativar, and really plant something. Honestly, plant something. Even if it's an exotic, that's not the highest and the best recommendation, but it's better than doing nothing. In a lot of places, even exotic plants have been shown to have important ecosystem services. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. If I don't want to sort of give you like a flashback from high school biology, I'm not trying to, shock you or anything, but if you don't remember this is chlorophyll. And in a sense, it's kind of like the miracle molecule that the planet depends on. Every plant has it. And if you look at it at the top, you see light, water, and CO2 are going in. And what comes out is oxygen and glucose. And what chlorophyll makes are the essential elements that we need for human life on Earth. We have to breathe air, and glucose is carbohydrate, it's food, it's energy. So it's what all of our food is originally sort of comes from that. Even like the fossil fuels that we burn all started as plants. It is this miracle, this absolute miracle molecule that sustains us. And so in the face of, changing climate, it's essential that we plant something. It's better than nothing. You're not going to go wrong. There's an excellent example of this. This is the cover of a book from the Gottlieb Garden, which is in Los Angeles. But it is this incredible space. It's 1 acre, and it's been planted just chock filled with different types of native plants from that California region. And in a 5-year period, they've documented over 1,500 species of wildlife, plants, insects, everything from, cougars and osprey to insects that have previously not been known to science. And that's pretty cool. I mean, you think of California, Southern California, how highly developed it is, LA, Beverly Hills, and even there, you can plant native plants and create this incredible refuge of diversity that's so essential. And even to find an insect that hasn't been known to science it's pretty amazing, all in 1 acre. And that's really sort of how we start to reclaim our landscape is really 1 acre at a time. Another great example is the High Line. Before they built the High Line, they documented 20 species of native plants. After building the High Line and supplementing it with all sorts of trees and shrubs and perennials, most of them are native. There are over 100 native species there. And in a recent study, they found over 33 species of just bees, not pollinators, but just different bee species. And here this is, this ribbon of green through the middle of the concrete jungle of Manhattan. So in a sense, if you build it, they will come. I always love, there's a bumper sticker from Mullane Nursery. It says, it's very simple. It's just green. And it says plant a tree on it. And I think if there's a message that I want to kind of leave you with, it's the idea of plant something. Ideally we can plant plants that have a huge amount of genetic diversity that allow for the insects and the birds and the other wildlife to really be able to have that big set of genes that they need in the gene pool to be able to adapt to climate change. And I think we will be able to do that. But even if you're not able to do it perfectly and execute it well, even planting something will be beneficial. Even one element of the goldenrod gallfly that I didn't tell you about is, well, actually, I guess I did. I mentioned that it's been able to change species in the northern part of its range. It's starting to feed on a second species of goldenrod. Well, there are numerous documented cases where an insect has been able to change. Not all can. Some are very specialized and can only feed on a single species, but that's the exception, not the rule. A lot of insects are able over time, if they have to and are under pressure, is to change species of food if they have to. But the more diversity that we can put out there, the more options that it gives nature, the more options it has to adapt and to be resilient and to stand in the face of climate change. So I like this picture, and I'll just kind of wrap up with this. We did not save the monarch butterfly, but the first year that I was at Heisted, or the first couple of years, there were almost no monarchs at Heisted for much larger reasons than what we're doing on our property. The numbers were low and they came back, but we've been able to plant nectaring plants. We've been able to plant the host food plant that it needs, the different milkweed species. And it's amazing to go 1 year and not find an entire monarch butterfly anywhere, go a second year and only see one or two, and then a few years later look out and see 3 or 4 on a single plant. So I say that just to say it's not all gloom and doom. There are things that we can do. that can really benefit nature. And I encourage you to do as much as you can. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dory. That was awesome. There's so much to think about there. If you guys have any questions, you can throw them in the chat. And if no one has any questions, we'll end it in a second. But hopefully, we'll be able to post this recording on Earth Places YouTube. So if you are like, I need to tell my friend about the gall flies and the whole interaction there, you can hopefully find it on our YouTube in maybe a week or so. You can check back in, or you can always email us at Earthplace and we'll just send you the recording right away. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'll give it a second. You can unmute yourself or you can throw it in the chat. Siobhan, I have a question for you. Let's see if she can unmute. Wait.
Yes.
What was your favorite part?
Oh my gosh, the galls. Actually, Geordie, I would love to know if you have a favorite gall or gall and insect interaction or gall maker interaction.
Um, you know, I don't know if I have a favorite. It's kind of like Sophie's Choice. It's like there's so many amazing things. I feel like the more I learn about how intricate nature is, it just kind of like ropes you in. It's so complex. There's so much happening, and we think we know a lot, but I think we're really just scratching the surface of everything that's there. And it's who knew that we had 401 of 475 species of moths at Highstead. But that's mind blowing, and we can be, planting plants and doing things like we don't necessarily even know the effect that they're having because we don't get the chance to really research it and really study and know most of the time. Um, yeah, I think there's so much more to learn. I think that's really my favorite thing.
That's the most exciting and also the most daunting part about being an ecologist, I think. It just never
Yeah,
ends. And
yeah,
especially if you're a plant person, if you're a bug person, people think you're an expert, but if the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So it never ends. But thank you
yeah,
so much, Jordy. That was really an awesome presentation. Um,
yeah,
we can close it out now. And Jordy, I'll be in touch. Hopefully you can make it to our bio blitz that we're having this summer. If anyone else that's still uh in here is interested, where Earthplace is doing a big bio blitz, and we're gonna have Lucas, moth genius, coming
yeah.
by moth surveys, um, and like a whole day of botanizing and trapping bugs and fun stuff.
Yeah, I'll just say if you're interested in Highstead, go to highstead.net. You can get on our mailing list. We've got an open house coming up in May and some different talks and walks and whatnot. So if you're interested in visiting, I encourage you to come. It's a really cool place and hope you can enjoy it at some point.
Siobhan was texting me in the beginning, like, I didn't know I said was so cool. Like, I gotta go. So I think you got him. It's super fun.
Yeah, yeah. You come for a field trip.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you, Jordy, so much. Everyone else have a great night.
Yeah,
All right. See.
great. Take care. Have
Thank
faith.
you.
Thanks, Jordy.